As we're all very well aware, the world is very chaotic for many different reasons going on, and it's scary for a lot of people, and a lot of people are confused as to why this is. Fact is, there's a really simple analogy that will work, that makes some sense. And it's complicated, but it's simple to understand. Imagine I took a bunch of first graders to a maternity ward, okay? And we take them through the birthing rooms, right? 6, 7 years old. And what do they see? They're going to see a lot of screaming, right? A lot of things that, 6-year-olds don't often see. A lot of blood, right? Some fear, some excitement. It's going to be confusing. It might be even traumatic for a first grader, okay? And they'd be wondering what's going on here. And you try to explain to them, as wild as that maternity ward is, it's actually a good thing. Why is it a good thing? Because people are having babies, and that's a good thing. That's how most people see it. And yet if you didn't know that's what was happening, you'd see the blood and the fluids and the screaming and the nervousness and all the tension, and you'd think this is a bad thing, right? Because that's scary stuff. And yet at the end, there's a good thing that happened. Well, 2 very, very powerful teachings come from Jesus and his closest confidant in terms of understanding him, Paul, in which they say, Jesus said, life is like childbirth. He says when a woman is having her labor pains, she's in anguish, but once it's all over, she forgets the pains because it's all worth it. Then he says, so it is with you. Your life is going to have some pain, and there's a long process, but it's worth it. In the end, you'll see something will be born in the end. And then Paul says very clearly, I am with you in childbirth, right? He says, until Christ is formed in you. Because it's like we have some sort of baby. It's like we're all some sort of uterus, and we have a pregnancy going on inside of us. And Paul says, Christ is being formed in you, just like a little baby is developing inside of a mother. And so he says, I'm with you in childbirth. Well, what's that make him? Apostle Paul was a spiritual obstetrician. See, because he understood what was going on. He understood the chaos. See, the doctor that is trained to deliver babies understands all the details and all the things that are going to happen. And so you've got a nervous dad and a screaming mom and maybe a lot of other tense people around, but not the obstetrician. He's a calm, cool cucumber, right? He knows what's going on. He's got this. And Paul says, I'm with you in childbirth too until Christ is formed inside of us. And so we experience chaos. We experience blood and guts, and we experience stress and anxiety and all those various fears in the world too, right? But the spiritual obstetrician like Paul is the person that gets it and understands that there's a point. What's happening here? There's actually something going on. As crazy as the world seems, and it's crazy every day, isn't it? There's something going on here. So there's the analogy. As difficult as a life seems, and as chaotic as it gets, and as messy as it gets, there's something that's going on behind the scenes. If we're only operating on a kindergartner or first grade level, we might not get it. But if you're an obstetrician, you'll understand what's happening, and you can be calm, cool, and collected. Okay? Well, that's the world that we're living in. It's chaos, but something's happening. Let's go through some of the chaos. We're all well aware of the trial that was held recently, and the law and the justice and things that people are focused on. And that's all legitimate and no argument there. And yet, the teachings that Jesus is talking about goes beyond that. It goes even deeper. We're going to talk about the law a little bit. What is the law, what Jesus talks about? Is it an external thing or is it an internal thing? So let's talk about the CMU experiments on the fMRI in the brain and the brain signatures that they discovered. I have a little drawing here. This is a brain, and these are neurons inside the brain. And what the CMU scientists figured out is that all of us, with very few exceptions, have the same brain, functionally speaking at least. Why is that? Because we have the same signatures located in the same spot in our brain. My left hand is in the same spot as your left hand. My right eye is in the same spot as your right eye. Again, with very few exceptions. Well, they have found, using really detailed fMRI machines, that the idea of gossip or a gossiping person is a signature inside the brain, and they can find it in the same spot in everyone's brain. A spiritual person has the same brain signature. The idea of a hammer is in the same spot in everyone's brain. So if you're thinking of a hammer and I'm thinking of a hammer, it's in the same spot in each of our brains. That's how they can tell. I know where your right hand is, And it can also tell if you're thinking of a hammer because those neurons are lit up. And it's the same spot in my brain. They've done this with characteristics like kindness, love, and hypocrisy. They've done it with math problems. They can tell if you're trying to add or subtract. Why? Because the way you add or subtract lights up in your brain the same way it does in mine. They've also found that there's a Jennifer Aniston neuron. Look it up, right? There's a Jennifer Aniston neuron inside your brain. And every time you think of Jennifer Aniston, that neuron lights up. Okay? It's seemingly incredible, except it's not so much when we consider the rest of the body. I know where your shoulder is and where your knee is. I also know where the thought of a hammer is inside your brain. And I also know that kindness and love and hypocrisy are located in your brain just like they're located in mine. So, in Galatians, when Paul is teaching the fruits of the Spirit, he mentions love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against these there is no law. So he mentions a bunch of characteristics. Love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness. Guess what? Love, kindness, they're found inside the brain. They're in the same spot in your brain as mine. Right? Against these things there is no law. What law can government, what law can our politicians pass that address this stuff directly, foolproof? None. Because I could practice that in any context. I could practice it in jail falsely accused. I could also be a criminal in jail and practice those things. I can be on the victim side of things or the perp side of things. I can be in traffic and practice that stuff. No amount of law can affect that. And Paul says, against such things there is no law. Meaning you've got external physical world laws that, you know what, we all should follow. Unless they're bad laws, then we should try to change them. And that's fine, let's have at that. But there's internal laws that no congressman or no politician can change. What are those laws? You have kindness in the same spot as your brain is mine. If you don't learn kindness, you're going to struggle. You're going to have some arguments. You're going to have some fights. Love, important characteristic. We all like that feeling. Well, if you don't learn it, but if you don't practice it, you don't get good at it. Gossip, that's in your brain too. Some people are really good at that. It also leads to issues, relationship problems. It's in your brain. You can practice all this stuff independent of whatever physical laws man has produced. Against such things there is no law. This stuff is already in your head. These are some natural laws that exist. You might say God put them into play, he being the master politician. In Matthew 23:23, Jesus says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees." And who are the scribes and Pharisees of his day? It's people who were talking the talk, but not walking the walk. Woe to you, Pharisees, you hypocrites. Now again, hypocrisy is located inside our brains. They can do a brain scan and tell if you're being a hypocrite or not. Well, Jesus knew they were being hypocrites, because the laws that they were paying attention to were external laws, laws of man. And we can argue about what's right and what's wrong as a man all we want. That's not spiritual. The spiritual laws are inner laws. Jesus says, "Woe to you, Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin." What is tithing mint and dill and cumin? It just means physical stuff. Tithing means to give that stuff, if you will. And it's physical. You can give money to church. You know, you could give food to the hungry, and that's all good. And Jesus even mentions that. We'll get to that in a second. But he says, you tithe all of that, but you've neglected the weightier matters of the law. Justice and mercy and faithfulness. These are the weightier matters of the law. What law is he talking about? Traffic violations or, gun control or those types of laws? Pro-life, pro-choice? No, that's not what he's talking about. The weightier matters of the law that he's talking about is the inner laws. The laws of the Spirit. The laws that are very, very clear and very, very logical. If you don't learn forgiveness, you're going to have resentment. And you will learn forgiveness. If you don't have patience, you're going to be impatient. Nobody likes that. We work on that over time and you develop something called patience. Patience is located in the same spot in your brain as mine. These are inner laws. They're the weightier matters. The weightier matters of the law are justice and mercy and faithfulness. So what is he talking about? External or internal? Let me show you what internal justice looks like. External justice is when we take someone to court and we throw them in jail or not. And then we celebrate, yay, that person got jail or they got out of jail or whatever. That's a legitimate thing. Jesus even says you should tithe. You should pay attention to those external matters, right? But the weightier matters are internal justice. Let me show you internal justice. Everyone has this inside their head. Every human being has the capability to be kind and loving and spiritual, but also to gossip and be a hypocrite. You can be resentful, or you can be forgiving. That's the inner. The challenge is you can't tell what someone else is doing just based upon their behaviors. We assume all the time, especially in our political dynamic, we assume we know what someone else is doing, but we don't. This is why I've left Buddha's phrase up here so long. Strive for your own liberation with diligence. You know if you're trying to be forgiving. And what is mercy? Should I let someone out of jail? Someone who commits murder, should I let them off the hook? Or can I trust the system of justice, which is a person who's what we call a bad person? Are they peaceful inside if they don't have these virtues? The stuff that Paul emphasizes, love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, those things sound like good things to me. And if I feel those things, I feel good. It doesn't matter what situation I'm in. It's why Apostle Paul said he was not in jail, the guards were in jail, because Paul was freed inside his own head. He found himself in any circumstance, and he found himself free. Buddha teaches equanimity. It's the exact same thing. If you have those characteristics, you're free wherever you go. You also know that you're not a physical being, you're a spiritual being. See, that's the birth that we were talking about at the beginning. At the end of your process, you'll have this realization. What's called born again is to realize that you're a spiritual being, you're not a physical one. And now you're free. And you could be in any circumstance for that. Fact is, the more difficult the physical circumstances, and in some contexts, the more unfair our physical laws, the greater opportunity you have to do the internal laws, which are found right there in our brain, and they're terribly fair because they're in everybody's brain in the same spot. And it doesn't matter what circumstances you're in. This is how Jesus is the Savior. He came to show us this. It's the same teachings of Buddha and the other prophets. And he doesn't come to get us out of jail. That's not what it's about. Nor does he come to take away grandma's cancer. That can happen. Yes, it can happen. But it's not his intention. At the end of Matthew 23:23, he does say, you should tithe, but do not neglect the others. So a whole lot of people are walking around focusing on external laws. And they think that's super important, as if justice is when physical things happen to physical people, and now we've got justice. That's external justice. And you should work on that. No problems there. Just not always going to get it right. There's like 10,000 documentaries online right now of people who were found guilty of crimes, and now they're out of jail because of one reason or another. Okay? It turns out to be fair because whether you're in jail or not, whether you're in a college or not, whether you're in a professional sports league or not, whether you're in a relationship or not, whether or not you have kids, whatever situation, if you're physically healthy, if you're physically rich, you still have all these virtues inside your head. And that's the inner law. Each one of us needs to pay attention to those weightier matters. In the end, when you do it the right way, what happens? We form a brain chemistry. We have things like the pineal gland squirting out dimethyltryptamine, okay? You could produce endorphins and serotonin and GABA and all these wonderful brain chemicals when you practice things like love, joy, peace, forbearance, and kindness. And you produce an inner state that is very liberating and very freeing. How does Buddha say to strive for your own liberation? Does he say to always stay out of jail? Or stay out of difficult relationships? Is that how you get liberated? By staying away from difficult circumstances or unfair circumstances? No, it's to be in a difficult circumstance and be detached from it. Then what have you done? You have activated these various parts of your brain. You get a feeling state that both Jesus and Buddha say is an inner state, that's heaven or nirvana. You have clarity and you know how to go help other people with this because you see the justice in all of it. You work with people on just physical justice, you're going to get frustrated a lot. But when you realize that this whole thing is a maternity ward, each one of us, as Paul says, has Christ forming inside of us. The Buddha's first awareness was that we're all Buddha. We're all going to come to these realizations. Everybody's doing this at different rates. Everybody's going to eventually get there. Once you realize that, you've just walked into a maternity ward and there's chaos everywhere, but you go, I get it. Everybody's delivering their own spiritual baby.